600 years ago, in the dense forests of West Africa, there was a problem no army could solve. Horses died here. Not from war, not from neglect. They died from something invisible, a tiny fly, no bigger than a grain of rice, carrying a disease that could kill a horse within weeks of exposure. For centuries, this single insect shaped the fate of empires. It decided who could build cavalry, who could move armies quickly across vast distances, and who was condemned to fight every war on foot. Most kingdoms in this region simply accepted that fate. One did not. The grasslands of what is now southwestern Nigeria, a kingdom found a way around nature's own defenses and used it to build one of the most feared military powers West Africa had ever seen. A cavalry empire, in a land that cavalry wasn't supposed to survive in. This is the story of the Oyo Empire, and how they conquered the impossible. To understand what the Oyo Empire achieved, you first need to understand the trap nearly every kingdom in West Africa's forest belt was stuck in. The culprit was the tsetse fly, a small blood-feeding insect found throughout the humid forest regions of Central and West Africa. When it bites, it can transmit a parasite that causes a disease known as trypanosomiasis, or more commonly, sleeping sickness. In humans, the disease is dangerous but often survivable with treatment. In horses, it is almost always fatal. An infected horse doesn't die quickly. It weakens over weeks' fever, swelling, exhaustion until it can no longer be ridden, no longer be worked, and eventually, no longer survives at all. For a kingdom trying to build a mounted army, this made horses a devastating investment. You could import them, breed them, train them for war, and lose your entire cavalry to disease before a single battle was fought. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was, for centuries, one of the defining military limitations of the region. Compare this to empires like Mali or Songhai further north, in the drier Sahel region, where the tsetse fly couldn't survive and cavalry flourished as a result. Those empires used mounted warriors to project power across enormous distances, controlling trade routes and territory that infantry-based kingdoms simply couldn't match. But south of the Sahel, in the humid forest zone, most kingdoms had no such option. They built their power differently through fortified towns, dense infantry formations, and defensive alliances. Effective, but slower. More vulnerable to being surrounded, worn down, or cut off from key trade routes by faster-moving enemies. Some kingdoms tried to import horses anyway, treating losses as an unavoidable cost of war. It rarely worked as a long-term strategy. Replacing an entire cavalry force every few years was neither affordable nor sustainable for most treasuries. The Yoruba people who founded Oyo looked at this same problem and asked a different question. Not, how do we survive without cavalry, but how do we get cavalry anyway? Oyo's location turned out to be its greatest advantage. The empire's heartland sat right at the edge of the savanna, close enough to the drier grasslands to the north where the tsetse fly couldn't survive, but connected by trade routes deep into the forest zone to the south. This gave Oyo access to something almost none of its neighbors had. Reliable supply chain for horses, brought down through trade networks from the Sahel region to the north, where breeding and keeping horses was viable. But having horses wasn't enough. The real innovation was what Oyo built around them. By the 17th century, Oyo had developed a professional cavalry corps organized, trained, and maintained as a standing military force, not just a battlefield asset assembled for a single campaign. Soldiers specialized. Horses were rotated, cared for, and replaced through continuous trade rather than desperate one-time purchases. This is what separated Oyo from every other power in the region. It wasn't luck, it was logistics. With cavalry now at its core, Oyo's army was about to become something its neighbors simply couldn't match. And that power was about to turn a regional kingdom into an empire. With cavalry now at its core, Oyo's army became something its neighbors simply couldn't match in open terrain. Horsemen could strike fast, retreat before infantry could respond, and control territory far larger than any foot soldier army ever could. Historians estimate that at Oyo's height, in the 18th century, its influence stretched from its capital in the north down to the Atlantic coast, controlling trade routes that connected the interior of West Africa to European traders on the coastline. Every kingdom along the way paid a price for defying Oyo's cavalry. One of the clearest examples came in the kingdom of Dahomey, to the west. Dahomey had built its own formidable army, but it had no answer for Oyo's cavalry in open country. After a series of defeats it couldn't recover from, Dahomey was forced into submission, becoming a tributary state paying annual tribute to Oyo to avoid further devastation. For decades, that tribute flowed north, a yearly reminder of who held power in the region. Oyo wasn't just the strongest army in West Africa. It had become the power that decided who traded, who paid, and who survived. But absolute military dominance abroad didn't mean absolute control at home. Inside the empire, a very different kind of power struggle was unfolding, one that would prove far harder for any Alafin to win than any battlefield. Unlike many empires where military strength concentrated power entirely in one ruler's hands, Oyo built something more complex, a system of checks specifically designed to prevent any single Alafin, the empire's king, from becoming too powerful. This system was called the Oyo Mesi, a council of senior chiefs holding real authority over the throne itself. The head of that council stood a figure called the Basharun, the most powerful chief in the empire, and the Alafin's sharpest check. If the Oyo Mesi judged that a king had lost the confidence of the state, they held the authority to force him out entirely. History records real Alafins who faced exactly this fate, rulers whose ambitions or failures pushed the Oyo Mesi to act, ending reigns that had grown too extreme or too weak to hold the empire together. It wasn't democracy in the modern sense, but it was a deliberate structure of accountability, remarkable for its time. History records real Alafins who faced exactly this fate, rulers whose ambitions or failures pushed the Oyo Mesi to act, ending reigns that had grown too extreme or too weak to hold the empire together. It wasn't democracy in the modern sense, but it was a deliberate structure of accountability, remarkable for its time. For nearly 3 centuries, Oyo stood as proof that geography and disease didn't have to be destiny. A kingdom that could have been permanently boxed out of cavalry warfare instead became one of the most militarily dominant states in West African history. Its influence didn't vanish with the empire itself. Yoruba political tradition, religious practice, and oral history still carry echoes of Oyo's structures today, a legacy far outlasting the empire's borders. But Oyo's fall wasn't caused by an outside conqueror arriving to break its cavalry in open battle. It came from within a succession crisis, a rebellious governor, and an alliance that would bring a new religious and military force straight into the empire's heartland. Textbooks rarely mention Oyo, documentaries rarely cover it, but its story belongs alongside any of the great cavalry empires in world history, and its ending is just as dramatic as its rise. That collapse, the civil wars, the broken alliances, and the empire that came apart from the inside is next time, here at Vault of History. If this is the kind of history you wish they'd taught you in school, subscribe and step into the vault.